Hey everyone, it's great to be here with you. For those who don't know me, my name is Madhav Rajan. I'm the Dean and the George Schultz Professor of Accounting at Chicago Booth. It's great to be here to do this event, and I'm thrilled you could be here to welcome alum Matt Maloney, co-founder and former CEO of Grubhub, to come back for our virtual Distinguished Speaker Series. I know we have students and alumni watching this from all over the globe, so welcome. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. The DSS, of course, is a long-standing Chicago Booth tradition, and the goal is to bring in leaders from business, from the government, from the community, to come back to the school to share their insights and experience. We moved to a virtual format back when COVID began, back in 2020, and we learned that format works really well to be able to get a lot more of our alumni to come and to attract an even bigger audience. So we've sort of persisted with that to today. This is a big year for the school. As many of you know, we're celebrating the 125th anniversary of Chicago Booth. And through the year, we're celebrating the milestone. We're reflecting on 125 years of ideas, innovation, and impact. And today is a big day. Today the students are sort of back at school. We're thrilled to be here to do this as the first Distinguished Speaker Series event of the 23-24 academic year. So let me introduce our distinguished guest. So Matt, co-founder and former CEO of Grubhub, and under Matt's leadership, Grubhub grew its active diner network to 30 million users, ordering from over 300,000 restaurants in over 4,000 cities. Matt led the company through 5 rounds of funding, 2013 merger with Seamless, as well as a 2014 IPO. Matt serves as an advisory board member for our Polsky Center, and he's a member of Chicago Next, which is dedicated to driving growth and opportunity in the Chicago business community. He also serves on the board of directors of Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. Matt's been named one of America's most powerful CEOs, 40 and under in Forbes magazine, one of the top 50 business people of 2014 by Fortune magazine. We're thrilled to have Matt back here to talk about his journey from Grubhub co-founder to exit, including winning the NVC. So please join me in welcoming Matt. Matt, thanks for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is, I'm excited. This will be fun.
Yeah, so you were one of the very early people who did 2 degrees, one in computer science and one at Booth to get your MBA. How did you make the decision that those were the things you wanted to combine, and sort of how did your experience at U Chicago happen overall? How did it influence you?
Well, there's this concept of a random walk. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but it's kind of like that. I started out in science, and I ended up working for the University of Chicago in the BSD group in the medical radiology division. And there I ended up learning how to program Perl and doing all this stuff in like 98, 99. And there was a great honestly, it was an educational stipend. So I took advantage of being an employee of the university and got my master's in computer science, graduating in 2000, where, as you remember, it was kind of the heyday of internet. And so I was, I was quite literally walking from the train station to the BSD, and I shortcut through Ida Noyes, and there happened to be an education, or not education, a work kind of like bazaar. Like it was a open house type thing, right? And there's just booths everywhere. And I just got looped in by this apartments.com group, and they're like, wait, you're getting a grad degree in comp sci in 2000 and you're not working in the internet? Or like, let's figure that out. So that's how I ended up in the internet. So I went to private sector, and then or internet, and then I through that experience figured out the concept behind Grubhub. And as I'm building it out, it was really apparent that I was, strong in science, strong in computer science, and really poor in business. I really kind of had to gain my bearings. And so my genius insight was I should go to business school to learn how to run a business. And of course, I'm going to go to U of C because I love the academia. I loved like the campus. It was just such a part of like who I had been to date that Booth was the obvious choice. And so it was funny. I went there for a practical education on how to run a business as a computer scientist who's an entrepreneur. And of course, like this is a true story. My first class was advanced tax strategies or something like that. It was like I just skipped the first. I went right to the applied stuff. And I learned all about these reverse triangle mergers, which had absolutely nothing to do with being an entrepreneur, or how to run QuickBooks so you could figure out your ledger so you could pay your actual taxes. But I didn't know that. So I'm like studying, trying to figure this stuff out, and just really feeling like an idiot for doing this. Well, come to find out, fast forward 10 years, I did a reverse triangle merger with Seamless in 2013, right before we went public. And the lawyers are like, we're going to do this really esoteric, reverse. I'm like, hey, I know that. I went to Booth. I got it. And so it was just kind of random, but yeah, it was a fun journey, and UFC played a big part in a bunch of stages.
Yeah, could you talk about the New Venture Challenge? What made you decide to participate in it? And of course, you took the first place at the New Venture Challenge. And so what was that experience like, and what did you take from it?
The New Venture Challenge was a really fun experience and kind of a changing moment for me. I mean, I've had a vast array of really cool experiences and so many evolutions in my career. I mean, first I was in hardcore science. I had a fantasy of going to medical school at one point. I became a programmer and taught myself Perl. I became a business person, and really in the form of product. How do you build a product that has true value that you can scale and generate real growth? And that's where I was when I joined, when I started going to Booth. I had a good idea of what was going to work. I had no idea how to calibrate it, project it, organize it, or communicate it. And that was really what the New Venture Challenge did for me, because I evolved into someone who was able to fundraise on a new idea by being able to communicate value. And then as you scaled the business, it was more organizational management and scaling, and how do you work the levers of humans leading humans to organize to a shared goal. And then of course there was the public markets chapter in my life, and then there was the M&A. So it's kind of been these different evolutions on a theme, but the NVC was like the transfer point where, it's funny. Many people have heard this anecdote, but Steve Kaplan loves to tell the story of my underwhelming application and in fact, my bomb of a new pitch, all the way to the successful conclusion of the New Venture Challenge, in which we won. And it's true. Like, the application didn't work. I didn't get let in. I had to go and effectively beg Steve Kaplan to let us in, and he let us in. And our first pitch was a bomb. But what was going on is I knew that we had figured something big out, and I communicated that in the way I knew how, which was through technology and pictures and just kind of emotion. And that falls flat when people start asking you about unit models and growth rates and EBITDA, and I was kind of lost. And so the New Venture Challenge was this process where we went to each of the judges and sat down and communicated in a more fulsome way. And they said, "Oh, I get what you're doing, but you need to be talking about this or that." Like, I think it was Ann McGill and JP Dubé were super helpful in helping us understand the marketing and how do you track and promote and accelerate. And it was a practical guide on how to communicate value. It was really cool. It was fun. And there's, other professors that I met during that process, Austin Goolsby, Mark Tebby. I mean, people I still talk to now. It was the most important thing I did at Booth, full stop.
To the audience, we have a bunch of questions that came in, but feel free to submit new questions through Q&A. I'll sort of intersperse that with the old stuff. So Matt, if we could chat about your time at Grubhub. Some of the questions came from the audience, like I said, many of whom are doing entrepreneurship themselves or trying to. One question was, many founders don't have the chance to lead startups for as long as you did. What made you endure in the CEO role for as long as you did?
Yeah, I mean, I think while it was going on, it wasn't really, that wasn't top of mind. And then when it's over 20 years later, you're like, holy cow, like that was crazy. And for me, it was, I feel very lucky. It was a fascinating journey. Every year was growth. I've said it before, like no year was the same. There wasn't one year in those 20 years where I was, kind of like, okay, well, it's September again. Let's turn that wheel. It's like, it was completely new between scaling, growing the company, fundraising, preparing for an IPO, buying this company. Like it just, so the way I did it, the strategy that I had, which, I believe led to my ability to stay and I believe be productive that whole time, is I just surrounded myself with the very best people I could find. I have no ego. I mean, I don't care. Anyone can tell me I'm wrong and I'll argue. It's kind of the, UFC way. But at the end of the argument, we're going to be aligned and I could be wrong and maybe I'm right. And then we're going to move forward. And I wanted to learn from people. I just really appreciate that. So one of my biggest partners in the business was Adam DeWitt, who I hired, after taking on significant VC money. And I hired him because he had been a public CFO before. And this was a soft spot for me. Even though I went to Booth, I'm no CFO. So I was able to say, like, look, you're way more experienced than me in all these things. You're way smarter than me in all these things. I'm going to pay you more. He knew that. I mean, he ran the money. And so I want to learn from you. Help me build this company to be something incredible. And it was employees like that, but it was the board. I know people who fill their board with a bunch of softies, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted a board that pushed me, a board that questioned my instincts, told me I was wrong, and almost made me fight a little bit to get my way, or acknowledge, yeah, you know what? I came into the board meeting with a bad recommendation. I'm going to about face and go the other way because you are right. So I think that was really important to, I make a lot of mistakes. So course correct when you get those mistakes, and just never quit. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time.
Did your leadership philosophy, this notion of delegating, and did that change over time, or have you always sort of known that that's the way you wanted to run a company?
I don't think I changed philosophy. I think that I evolved philosophy. I've always appreciated other people's work when it's exceptional. I'm in awe of people who are just experts at what they do. And I think that's motivating, exciting, and very accretive to value. So that was always part of my philosophy, not getting caught up in having to be the smartest person in the room, all that garbage. I think that what I learned in managing people was, when you're hiring exceptional people, you just, your job ends up being removing roadblocks, helping people be more successful, and ultimately letting people lead. Actually, I took a class at Booth. I just remember this from Stacy Cole, who was great. And it was the first kind of academic analysis of diversity specifically that I had. This was pre all of the diversity stuff that we're hearing, or that has been for the past 5 years. And this was, I graduated in 2010, I believe. So it must have been like 2008 or 9. And her point was, if you look at the diversity of talent, you want to go for kind of the high risk, high reward talent, because they're going to over exceed your typical middle of the road expectations. And when you're working with professional recruiters, they give you a whole slate, and they're pretty much all right down the middle of the road. So as I was doing that, I was always thinking in the back of my head, like, how do I find more diverse individuals to be evaluating, whether that's racial, gender, or educational, or industry diversity was a really interesting way to think about it. And so like in my head, and this is what I would coach the executive teams, is like, look for those individuals who potentially could like be an absolute overachiever, who's coming from a direction that you might not always be in tune with. Frankly, they're either going to crush it or they're going to flame out pretty quick, and you can rehire. So that's interesting how that philosophy evolved. The other thing, if you're going to do that and you're going to really empower people to make great decisions, they're going to make mistakes. So you have to always have your radar up. And we used to talk a lot in the early years about kind of having your spidey sense up, and you don't quite know, you don't have specific KPIs that are key indicators for failure. You just kind of have to be watching like the terrain, almost like a firefighter at the top of a mountain, like looking at 100 miles, like what's going wrong? What's about to go wrong? And you kind of see some metrics dip and bobble, and you run. Your spidey sense has to be up, and then you attack that, and you try to resolve it. So that's kind of the way that I looked at managing the organization, and it worked as it scaled from 5 to 3,000 ish.
So as you look back, can you think of any like pivot points or sort of failures that ended up being good learning opportunities, and sort of what you took from that?
It's always a tough question, because in hindsight, there's a million, right? But if you put yourself back in that position with the information you had and the incentives that you had, it's hard to say, yeah, I should have done something differently. I think that with the benefit of hindsight, one thing that I do think about is I wouldn't have gone public in 2014 if I knew that the private late stage bubble would extend to 2022. I mean, we said at the time, I don't know who remembers this, but there was a private late stage bubble in 2014. It had started in 2009, 2010 is when there was a large influx in private money in startups, and we could have gone that route. But at the time, our investors, people had watched OpenTable have a really small IPO and do great things, and our investors were they were deep into their investment cycle because many of them came to the business through Seamless, which was a spinoff from Aramark, which was itself an LBO prior to that. So you had a bunch of people who are like, look, I need my liquidity. You can go public. Let's get it done. In hindsight, we kind of opened up our numbers for the world when the world thought restaurant delivery was about as unsexy as it got. People, it was an uphill battle pitching against small TAM, restaurants that didn't want to comply, not that much business being done. So when we actually opened up and said, look, this model is crazy, we're really 70+% profit margin, billions of dollars in potential. That's what spurred a lot, or that's what generated a lot of the competition. And effectively that late stage capital over those 10 years, it laid the infrastructure for delivery in the suburbs and the rural areas, which it didn't exist before. I mean, Grub, when we went public, I think we had reasonable numbers saying that the TAM for restaurant delivery, as we knew it in 2014, was something along the lines of like 60 to 80 billion domestically. And right now it's being quoted as 250+ billion. But the difference was delivery didn't exist outside of this major metro centers where Grub had a massive advantage and an install base. And so like, as the private money built that out, there was deep losses. But then obviously, the pandemic, which was completely unpredictable, not only shut down restaurants, but drove everyone out of the metro areas. So I think that, clearly there is externalities that are unpredictable, but the way it lined up kind of laid the path for the current market share. If you look at the companies that are operating right now and where they're operating and when they got big. So it's pretty fascinating. And of course you can pick out moments, that would have been more intelligent with 2020 hindsight, but you kind of move on.
No, I'll ask you about the industry in a bit, but we had an interesting question about what was it like working with a co-founder, and if you were to do it again, would you do it with a co-founder?
So I think it absolutely depends on your skills, your co-founder skills, and the trust you share together. And so it's a hard question. My co-founder was much better than I was technically. And I mean like 10x. But I think his weakness was kind of, well, I'm not going to talk about him. I would say that he was able to bring a acceleration to the early stages of this business that I couldn't buy, and I couldn't get funded. And so for us, yeah, that was the trajectory we used. In hindsight, I don't know if I would have done it differently, to be honest. It worked for us, and I don't have any complaints. If I'm starting a different business now, no, I'm not using a co-founder. I know how to start the business. I know where I can tap into funds in order to find the right people to build what I need at that stage of a business. And so I think if your question is coming from a Boost student who doesn't have a deep technical background and can't code or do code reviews on their own, yeah, I think you need a co-founder, or at least somebody with material equity stake who you can rely on to do that, because that's not what you're great at. It's really hard to find technical people who are great, who you can trust, because there's a lot of people out there who can speak a lot of mumbo jumbo jargon, and they can't actually get that product done and get it over the line. And if they can build something, frequently it's not actually what your customers want. And you kind of get stuck in this stutter cycle of not quite MVP, not quite right. I got to fix it, get it back out, not quite right. And so it's really challenging unless you have a robust product and engineering group or an individual who can do that for you. So I think that it's tricky. And a lot of those people, frankly, they can't speak business. They're like me before the New Venture Challenge. There's no way they can raise money without credibility in their industry. So it's a bit symbiotic, which is why you see a lot of co-founders happening. That's not exactly the situation that we had, because I couldn't do either at the time. But now I've figured my way out. But I think it's I think it's a very individual situational answer to that one.
We had a question about what do you think were the top 3 factors that made Grubhub successful?
Well, I had a great idea, to be honest, and I know it sounds dumb, but it's not. The idea was really cool, and the idea, I can tell you what happened. I was working at apartments.com. We were using geographical lookup algorithms to find apartments. It was a messy industry. There was before a marketplace, there was not a lot of transparency. There was not like the digital transactions. It was a lot more referral, a lot more posting. And so I was thinking about what other industries can you use similar algorithms with on data that had not been organized? And that was the trick. It was like, how do you find something that hasn't been organized, but it's still like, I'm here and I need information about where I am physically. And 2004 is when I had the idea. And back then, Yellow Pages would have restaurant advertisements that had the map that was in there. And so I was talking to Mike, my co-founder, about a different form of this idea that had to do with street sweepers. And I was like, that's not right. Like, it's not going to work because the data is constantly changing. You need data that's sticky and consistent, and it doesn't move, like restaurant delivery areas. And that was the moment. It was like, wait a minute, that works. And the restaurants would pay you for orders. And so that was like I got something here. I got simple technology. I got a consistent data set that basically never changes. I have a supply for a demand that is insatiable. And I have a customer that is willing to pay me for exposure if that platform works. And so that's what we built out. And, we messed up 100 ways, right? We had a SaaS model to begin with, which was stupid. We had phone orders only, which was stupid. We had, I mean, we couldn't have messed up more. But what we got right, and what you can't plan, is that the consumer cohorts were rock solid horizontal. And I think you guys are teaching consumer cohorts now, but for those that may have graduated before this was introduced in the curriculum, a cohort it's a segmentation of purchasers grouped by the first month in which they purchased their first product. So for us, it was every new diner that started in January was this cohort. And every new diner that started in February was that cohort, and March. So you'd end up with 12 cohorts for a year, and you'd chart, from 0 to $1 million, how much money they spent in their first month, and then how much money that cohort spent every month after that. And so what you saw in general, digital businesses, you see atrophy, less, a steeper slope than 45 degrees. And there was kind of this anecdote, which I learned from a guy that used to be C-suite at Zappos. Amazon bought Zappos at the time for, I think it was $1 billion, which was way more than Amazon had ever paid for anything, and one of the largest acquisitions in consumer online history at that time, because Zappos slope was like it's like, I don't know, 10% less steep than Amazon's cohort slope, and just that amount, if you applied it to Amazon's purchasing at the time, was worth way more than $1 billion. And Zappos claimed they had that because of their extreme service. If you remember back then, they were all about customer service. Anyway, that's kind of an aside, because Grub's trends were horizontal, and this was astounding. It was groundbreaking. No business had ever had this before. And frankly, this is what we exposed as part of the IPO process that got everyone so excited about it. And let's be fair, that was nothing that I did specifically. We just happened to tap into this incredible consumer purchasing, because every platform right now, regardless if it's domestic or international, has the exact same cohorts. In fact, this is a true story, I taught Nicholas, who's currently the CEO of Delivery Hero, which is one of the larger international delivery platforms, about consumer cohorts. On the phone one day, driving to Grub, we were chatting, because he'd been in the industry prior to Delivery Hero, and he was raising money. I'm like, no, you're doing it all wrong. You're doing it all wrong. Something called a cohort. Here's how you chart it, plot it, go show your investor, they'll figure it out. And literally that's how they got their funding, Delivery Hero, before the Samwares got involved. So it's pretty fascinating. So, all right, back to your question. It was a great idea. It tapped into something that was going to happen, but I mean, sometimes you get lucky, and that was great. The second was, we had a great team. Back to Mike, and even through Adam, and even the people we were hiring, when we started doing delivery in 2016, hire exceptional people. The early team was not very experienced, to be honest, and that was fine. We were smart, we were scrappy, and it was thrilling, the growth and our ability to experiment and then paint on the edges of the canvas. That was really fun. And then another thing that I remind people is that we had 10 years to experiment before we went public. 04 to 14, like I said, we made a lot of mistakes, and that's fine. We built $1 billion business. Maybe it was a $2 billion, I don't remember. But it was a big business over 10 years. And many of the, quote, unicorns right now, they had $1 billion or $4 billion valuations in 12 or 16 months. It's like, that's insane. Like, these people, they're not prepared. Like, you don't have multi-billion-dollar C-suite executives running these startups. You have kids with no experience that are just like jacked and energetic and like pushing as hard as they can. And that's just a recipe, for poor decision making. And so I think we were very lucky to, have the world in hindsight. At the time, I thought it was off. I said, restaurant delivery is a fantastic opportunity. You are all crazy. And they're like, restaurant opportunity is disgusting. It is dirty. It'll never scale. And because of those preconceptions, people left us alone for 10 years as we built this juggernaut of a business. And then, we introduced a lot of cool stuff after we went public: delivery, loyalty, a bunch of that stuff. But really, it was an M&A roll-up play as we bought a bunch of the smaller players with our liquid public currency and just aggregated the biggest player in the space, obviously, until 2020. So
we have a bunch of questions, Matt, about just the industry and how it's changing. So one, just on economics, how did you balance sort of becoming a partner with the restaurants and also trying to get like higher commission rates, and how did that sort of play out?
Yeah, so people don't realize it, but true to Booth, it was a competitive marketplace. The Grub was built as a competitive commission rate. So pizza restaurants in Hyde Park would be competing against pizza restaurants in Hyde Park, and whichever one paid us more would get more advertising. I mean, you see a bunch of retail media advertising now on Instacart and Amazon. They're doing an incredible job just of blanketing ads, but we kind of had an embedded advertising model and an escalating commission structure. And if you had, this sushi restaurant, we used to talk about, I think it was Pompeii. Pompeii was an Italian restaurant on the north side. I think it was in like Lakeview. And there was Pompeii, and then there was a different Italian restaurant. It was like Leona's or something across the street. And they used to compete heavily by flyering all the cars up and down. I think it was like Cedric, to be honest. It was right around there. And so like one day you get all these flyers, the next day you get all these flyers. And they were naturally competing, spending marketing dollars head to head. And so what we did is we literally took that digital, and they were going like 10%, 12%, 15%, 18%, 25%, 32%. And then one of them went like to 45%. I'm like, all right, that's like, this is not working. Like, you guys are crazy. And so we capped them like both. And then they had, actually, that's, I think, when we started doing star ratings to get a little bit of user generated content. So there was some tiebreaker in their minds, because like they were like rabid. And so it was harnessing that natural, instinctive, competitive spirit from these entrepreneurs that allowed us to build a competitive marketplace. And that's how our commission rate fluctuated. Over time that had to change because of bad actors. I mean, you'd have a dangerous sushi restaurant, for example, would pay 30% because they only had a customer for one transaction. And so they were constantly pulling new transactions. So you had to weed out a bunch of that stuff. Then it got complicated. And then it gets complicated, but I think that was the natural beginning of the company, is how do you digitally replicate the competitive spirit they have physically in their restaurants. And then I think what the question, that's the real answer. I think what the question was asking, or whoever asked it, is all the noise around the fee caps. And I understand, first of all, well, hang on, I'm not going to go there. We're going to pull it back. We're going to say that when a platform becomes the majority of a business's orders, and the platform has a material fee associated, that fee starts to be viewed as a tax. And everyone hates a tax because it feels like it's not value additive. And I get that too. So, even OpenTable had a lot of pushback from restaurants, even though OpenTable brought a service that didn't exist anywhere else at the time for restaurants. They didn't have digital ticketing or reservations. They didn't have digital seat management either. But they were viewed as a tax, and I get that feeling. And so I think the similar thing happened specifically in Manhattan, where Seamless was representing 80% of the how it ended up evolving. I think the recourse is, not. I mean, I'm from Booth. I don't believe in elected officials like artificially hindering the competition, in a free marketplace. But it is what it is, and I'm not in there anymore, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, let me ask you about the future of the business then, right? Like, where do people bring up questions of, is it sustainable? Do you think autonomous delivery is the future? Where do you sort of see the industry going?
Autonomous delivery is bullshit, and it always has been and always will
No.
be. So, sorry. All right, you two. Look, we've all been in New York City, and you know how much food is ordered at 5 o'clock in New York City. And do you want to see even like 10% of that being represented in drones zipping through the freeway or the 6th Avenue and then going up to the 13th floor and injecting your food into the open window? Like, how is this going to work? Like, okay, maybe an hour outside of Chicago, a pizza restaurant that has a 30-mile delivery radius will be able to, drop a pizza in on your driveway. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't make any sense. And these stupid robots that everyone's excited about. Here's the great thing about those robots. They're on like college campuses. And, I know a lot of college kids who, when they see those little machines drive by, they kick them over because that's funny to them. And like, what are you going to do? Like, you can't fix that. So I think autonomous is garbage. I think the industry, so post-COVID, the industry is in a weird spot because everyone's charging, call it 20%. I think they're like 100 billion in transactions nationally, I think, so that's coming up on, they're getting close to 50%. Feels like they're all still growing. So, are they going to be able to charge 20% on all orders, or 50% of orders, 80% of orders? Like, when's that going to break down? Because like I said before, there comes a time when it feels like, I can't be beholden to you. I have to do my own thing. The problem is there aren't a lot of options for restaurants because their customers want to order digitally. I mean, that ship has sailed, and people prefer platforms. And so how do you figure out how to integrate a white label solution without just totally screwing your revenue? Because now all the players are public, and before, during the late stage private capital bubble, Dash and Uber, they could undercut Grub all day long. SoftBank would pay for it. Nobody cared. In both cases, SoftBank was paying for it. And we were shooting to, $1.50 free cash flow. And so there was a disparity in terms of the actual price point for the general consumer. Now it's like everyone's kind of got these profit expectations. You're not going to find anyone who says, well, I'm going to drop profitability by 50%, because we're going to do the right thing. So, you got this immovable object and an unstoppable force. And I think it'll be interesting to see where that plays out.
So we have a general question about digital advertising, that it's becoming expensive now, significantly, to the point where customer acquisition costs are like going up. If you're a digital startup today, how do you grow without overspending on marketing?
I mean, the trick to digital marketing is you have to find the avenue that is under leveraged, because that's going to have the best ROI. So, there was a time when SEM, no one was doing SEM. There was a time when email, no one was doing email. Email was great. Now everyone's doing email, right? Now SEM, now everyone's doing SEM. So that gets bid up. Then there was the social advertising, which never worked really well, to be honest. But even now that's bid up. And then you had influencers, and that was bid up. So I don't know. I think my advice would be is to find digital, or I'm going to use the word scalable, not just digital, because I don't think it has to be explicitly digital unless your model requires that. but I'd find scalable ways to communicate the value of your product that other people aren't using. And then if you really invest in that, other people will follow, and over time that will become commoditized and the price will increase. And then in all the areas where other people are also spending, you need to find something about your proposition that is more intriguing than anyone else's. And so like, I would think through like, well, I mean, dumb things like anytime you say free, it gets a lot of attention. Free what? I'm sorry, what? Free what? Right? And like that always works. So, but that's like, I mean, that's not sexy at all, but it works. It's like email. It's not sexy, but it works. The thing that we were playing around with when I left, which I thought was really interesting, was the introduction of, and this was in the early stages of influencer, paid influencer programs. But when you would find a celebrity or someone with widespread awareness or with a personality that kind of resonated with your product, you could get them to almost be a pitch person. Like that's not new either, but that would drop the CAC pretty materially, because people, it's like a refer a friend in a scalable way. It's like, oh, hey, I love that guy's show. Oh, I really like his character a lot. So, he's telling me to order delivery from Grubhub. Maybe I'm gonna, they think through that. So it's an interesting, interesting way to expand the ROI of digital advertising in kind of non-standard ways. But if you're addressing this like every marketing agency is, then yeah, you're kind of screwed. It's not going to work.
So we have a bunch of questions about if you're a current student, right? What courses would you recommend to them? What skills do you think they need to acquire while they're at school before, if they want to become an entrepreneur?
I wouldn't think so hard, honestly. Like a bunch of the mistakes I see people making, whether it was in my own group or outside of my group, is like great minds overanalyze. And you think that there's one right answer. There's not. There's a lot of right answers. There might be an optimal answer, but you don't need the optimal answer every time. You just need kind of a directionally accurate answer. So like when I learned how to program, I learned Perl. And then the guy who made Perl, Larry Wall, he coined this term. It's called Tim Toady, and as an acronym for there's more than one way to do it. And I would say live by that. You don't need to be right. You just need to you need to get it done, and it can be hacked together. It can be gnarly and not elegant whatsoever, because if it works, you can go back and fix that, and you can optimize it later over time. But I would say like cultivate your instincts, verify with data, always verify, execute, fix your mistakes, rinse and repeat. Like it's not that complicated. In terms of classes, I would do data science, Python, sales for dummies, and an HR class, because you're going to end up needing that more than you think you do.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you on that last one. One of the questions came up is when you were an early startup, how did you hire people? What was your pitch to them when you couldn't pay, quote, market level salaries at that point? Like how did you persuade them to join your team?
Equity, baby. That's it. And it worked out. I mean, look, here's my comp philosophy. Like everyone deserves a fair market rate, but sometimes you can't pay that in cash. So you got to say, look, take as little cash as you need, and I'll give you $2 or $3 in equity for every dollar in cash. And if we're successful, you're going to be really successful. And it was true. That is the truth, and that is what happened. That doesn't always happen, and I understand that. So you have to be upfront with them that I believe in this 100%. I am taking years of my life and dedicating this for very little salary, and I'm asking you to do the same. And some people can't do it. Like really, really good people, they say, I can't, I need 80% of my comp in cash and sorry, like that's fine. Because they're not startup people. They don't believe in the vision. And you need people to believe in the vision. And if they will take 100% equity because they have 2 years of savings and they're saying, I got this, I'm doing this with you, then give them a ton of equity because they're going to be there with you in the trenches when it gets really tough and they're going to stick it out. And so that's the only pitch, and it's the right pitch, and it self-optimizes for the right people for your teams.
If you were to do a startup today, what industry would it be in and why?
I'm playing around with a bunch of stuff. I'm not super complicated. Like, I'm very excited about like AI, machine learning, blockchain. I think blockchain is still super cool, even though all the crypto stuff went to hell, because I think blockchain is most important for the authentication, digital authentication. AR, VR is exciting. I think quantum computing is really cool, especially as you're thinking through like massive blockchain calculations, massive AI, virtual reality. All these are computationally intensive. So quantum computing like success or widespread rollout could legitimately change the game in terms of what we can accomplish. But I don't do that stuff. Like that's too sexy for me. I like simple technology, applying it in dirty, messy industries where you need a transactional marketplace that needs transparency. And like, I think these things are everywhere. Like we become accustomed to this, this daily friction in our lives in various elements. And I was looking for an urgent care clinic recently. You know how hard that is? Like you got to Google, I don't live in the city anymore. You got to Google urgent care near me. And then you're like, okay, well, I could go like 15 miles here or 30 miles over there, 50 miles over there, but they're open till 9. These guys are only open till 7. Like, and this is even before like who takes what insurance, right? And it's just like dumb stuff like that, where it's like something I need urgently. Mm-hmm. That's what it's called. And it's hard to get access to it. So that's the type of industry that I see most opportunistic, because you can take silly, simple technology, you can put the data in there, you can do a lookup, you can start buying SEM ads, you can see if it's converting or not, you can go to a pilot and you can say, hey, look what I got over here. You want to pay for a few leads? It's super cheap. I'm just building it up. And then you start to get that flywheel going. And then that's when businesses really start to compound, and it's pretty fun.
And so your view is that you don't necessarily need like prior experience working in that industry to be like, well, that's the industry you want to go in. Like you didn't have any restaurant experience or distribution before you went into Grub.
None.
Okay.
Zero. I think you do not need that at all. I mean, if you're trying to optimize like the insurance claim processing, well, then yeah, you probably need to know that. But like, I'm not talking, I think in terms of a consumer. I'm willing to spend money. There's millions of people like me out here, who have the same problems I have, that have the same frictions in my life, would be made easier with simple technology. And so, no, I don't think you need to have prior experience in restaurant delivery in order to build a platform for delivery food.
So we had a question again, just on the whole delivery. And the question was, has delivery added value to restaurants in the sense that do they feel you're a necessary evil, or do you feel like they've seen sort of growth because they have used now these online delivery platforms?
Well, that's a leading question, but let me do my best on that one. So I'm not sure how they feel. And I can really only speak for the network that I built. Mm-hmm. But if you take a step back and you're logical about it, they probably feel like they're being taken advantage of. The reality is platforms together have 5-10x delivery in this country. And the lower end in the major metros, when you're looking at the talk about the suburbs of Chicago, there was no delivery. You could get a Pizza Hut, maybe. Right? Every now and then there's a local Chinese place. Maybe there's a sandwich shop. Jimmy John's, sure, they expanded around Chicago. I get that. Now you can go in any restaurant independent restaurant, quick service, fast food, sit down. You can get delivery from any restaurant in any Chicago suburb right now. And if you go to the independent restaurants, they would say, yes, I still have my in-restaurant business and I have all this new, pain in the butt delivery business that I didn't really want to do, but now I'm on there and it's making a bunch of money, so I'm going to do it. And I'm paying too much for that. Yeah, sure. Okay, fine. But that wasn't there before. It's incremental. And they're going to tell you, how do I move all my delivery customers that I pay for to my in-house customers, which I don't pay for? And that is 100% reasonable. But if you do that, you are expanding their revenue dramatically. So I think that economically, delivery platforms have been a slam dunk for the National Restaurant Association, no question. But I totally get the way they feel and the politics of the situation and trying to erode the margins of a third-party platform that has been building the business. And I also think that's totally logical. So that's the objective analysis.
That's a great answer. Thank you. So when you think about what you're doing and you talked about new things you're sort of thinking about, I presume people pitch ideas to you like all day long, asking you to sort of invest. We had a question about what's the process you follow for thinking about, is this a viable idea? Do you want to put your money into it? How do you do that?
Yeah, I don't invest unless I'm getting involved. Like, I want to be close to the founders. I want to understand the problem. I want to be able to add value. Ideally, I want to use this as a customer, so I can feel it, I can experience the value, and I can have thoughtful insight as to how we can grow the product and evolve it over time. So there's a few things I'm playing around with, and they're with great entrepreneurs and they're great products, and it's a lot of fun. But it's not really a process. Like, it's more of how do we build great companies, and how do, you're right. There's a lot of ideas being tossed around, but a lot of them I can't really help. Like, they might be great ideas, but like I'm not the right person to help.
We had a question about how do you maintain like balance in your life, right? Like, do you have routines or habits that let you maintain balance in your life, sort of, day to day?
No, I don't think that work-life balance is possible for hypergrowth or when you're evolving your business. I mean, you quit. If you, I'm sorry. Like, I know that's an awful answer. I could not find it. Let me say that again. I am not capable of that. That is not in my DNA. I tried really hard. And then, I mean, I ended up having to like pull out and like work, not quite sabbatical, but like, I was doing remote work before remote work for limited periods because I could not drive at that level for that long consistently. And so like, yeah, I don't think that should be experience of one. I don't think that should be the goal.
So you serve on a number of nonprofit boards. I mentioned a couple of them. At what point in your career did you feel like that's something that you wanted to sort of get into? And sort of what advice do you have for like alumni about like connecting back with the school, things like that? So, but just talk about your personal journey. When did you feel that was the kind of stuff you wanted to do?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I think that a bunch of opportunities came at me, after we went public, because they were the type of thing that, successful CEOs locally should be engaging with, which is totally fair. I like to engage with groups that are successfully making change in areas that I'm passionate about. To be honest, I'm not a good board member. I think the wonderful people on the Polsky Entrepreneurship Board would probably agree with me. But my commitment to these organizations is that if you need me, I'll be there. Like, if you're dealing with a situation or an opportunity that you want my perspective on, I am absolutely going to have that conversation. We're going to think really deeply and critically about it, and we're going to find the best answer together. Other than that, it's kind of like my management philosophy. Like, you guys are the experts. Like, you're running the company, you're running the nonprofit. Like, you know what you're doing, and let's do this together. But it's about, I like being involved. I like participating in cool exciting things, especially when they're working on really positive outcomes. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the organizations I'm with right now, but also, more broadly. So it's fun to kind of dabble around more now that I'm happily unemployed.
So one of the areas that you've been thinking about is like making Chicago, the Midwest, sort of a better like destination, let's say, right, for starting a business. So when did you sort of get involved with that? What are your thoughts on that?
It was always selfish because I was trying to recruit, right? It's amazing now post COVID. There is no like mecca of talent. Like when we were building the company in 2005, I mean, it was like all San Francisco. Like the guy that was the product manager for Google Chrome was like a buddy of mine from Chicago who had a local Chicago startup job and moved to San Francisco or the Bay Area, whatever, to work for Google. And he was super talented. And so there was this brain drain, which was painful to watch. And so when we were able to be of scale and interesting enough, we started really promoting that Chicago is a great place to live and work. And so we were very active with other Chicago companies. And honestly, when Ram was the mayor, we were working very closely to bring a lot of businesses to Chicago and successfully doing that. Post-COVID, when everything went remote, obviously the kind of key population areas just disintegrated. San Francisco cleared out, a lot of New York cleared out. They're still not at the urban office rates they were at, and people moved anywhere they wanted. So a lot of people went to Austin, but a lot of people went a lot of different places. I'm not in Chicago anymore either now because I can do whatever I want from wherever I am. And so I think that this is a moment when Chicago does have an advantage to attract more than its weight, because Chicago is a really great place to be. Now, I understand that there are recent I would hope short-term trends where, crime is going up and there's local, activity that is not ideal and that is counterproductive to really attracting a lot of people. So these are the real problems that Chicago has to solve. But if you take the crime out, if you take the negativity, there is not a better, more fun, more incredible place to spend your 20s and 30s and beyond than Chicago, than downtown Chicago. And like it is incredible. So I'm hoping it's going to come back. I think that, I think it will, but we'll have to see.
Matt, we're running out of time. So I just want to, again, thank you for taking the time to come back and for being so incredibly open and candid in talking to us and giving us advice, and for all the stuff that you're doing for the school and engaging with us. So Matt gave a talk at commencement, in the summer, and it's just been great to have you come back for the DSS. So thank you. We really, really appreciate this, Matt.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun. It's always great to talk to you guys.
All right. Thank you. See you, everyone.